When you're trying to understand English grammar, the first thing you really have to come to grips with is what is a verb. And in this video I want to try to explain what a verb is, show you what a verb is, and also to show you why it's not a good idea to think that a verb is an action word. I think that's probably the definition that a lot of people have in their heads about when they're asked what is a verb, that you say, well, it's an action word. Well, that is not actually very helpful in thinking about verbs. And let's start out by showing you why that is. So if we took this sentence, there's two sentences here, but let's look at this one. Seeing his smirking enemy approach, Sandor felt the dreaded hour of reckoning draw near. And if I asked you, well, what verb or verbs are there in this sentence? If you're thinking, well, a verb is an action word, you might, well, what would you think? And you might say, well, seeing, there's some action in there. Smirking, that's an action. Approach, that sounds like there's got some action in it. Dreaded, that's somebody's doing some dreading, so that's an action. Reckoning, that looks like an action, like I reckon that thus and so is going to happen. So that could be draw, like what I'm doing right now, drawing, that seems like an action. Felt, I'm feeling something, that seems like an action. What else? I think those are all the things that seem to me that could be candidates or seem to fulfill the condition of having action in them. Well, in fact, only one of these words is a verb, and it's felt. This is the only verb in this sentence. Everything else is not a verb, it's something else. Now, for me to go into detail about what all these things are, that would not be the first video in this series. I mean, because there's a lot of things you have to know before you can really understand what these other things are. But you can learn right now why these things aren't verbs. And let me start by giving you a better definition of a verb, better than a verb is an action word, and that is a verb is something with a subject. That is, subjects and verbs go together, and the shortest English sentence that can be is a combination of a subject and a verb. So, for example, if you take this very short sentence, Gabor eats. It consists of a verb, eats, and its subject, Gabor. And we see that the subject and the verb, as we say, agree. So it's not Gabor eat, it's Gabor eats. If you said Gabor eat, you would not sound, a native speaker would know that's incorrect. And the problem that the native speaker would be picking up on is a problem of what we call agreement. That is, Gabor eat is a sentence in which the subject, Gabor, does not agree with the verb, eat. Gabor, as a subject, agrees with eats. They are the subject and verb that go together. And you can't get any more basic than that when you're looking at an English sentence. It's the subject and the verb combination that holds the sentence together, that the sentence is built around. So, Sandor felt. That is a subject-verb combination. And any subject-verb combination could, in fact, stand alone as a sentence. Now, it might not be a very interesting sentence, like Sandor felt. Well, it's not much of a sentence, but it is grammatically complete. It's the subject, Sandor, and the verb, felt. None of the other things, none of the other words here that look actiony, they seem to have a lot of action in them, could satisfy that requirement. So, seeing. Well, you might say, well, now wait a minute, there is a subject-verb combination there, you might think. Because who's doing the seeing? Sandor is doing the seeing. Just as in this subject-verb combination, Sandor is doing the feeling. Sandor felt. But this cannot be a verb. Let's try to make a sentence out of this subject and this word. if you think it's a verb. And what you get is Sandor seeing, Sandor seeing. Well, that's not a sentence. You would need to add a word like is. You would need to add some form of the verb to be. Sandor is seen, Sandor was seen, Sandor had been seen, and so forth. But seeing all on its own cannot function as a verb with Sandor as a subject. You get this thing, Sandor seeing. You could go through all of these things, like approach. Well, now that again, that in other sentences, approach certainly is a verb. Like they approached the altar. I mean, that's a sentence. That's perfectly fine. But who would be doing the approaching here? Well, seeing the smirking enemy approach. Okay, well, enemy. The enemy is doing the approaching. But if we put those two together, enemy and approach, as a subject-verb combination, once again, you get enemy approach. That is not a subject-verb combination. If it were a subject-verb combination, it would have to be the enemy approaches, not enemy approach. So this is not a verb. Whatever it isn't a verb. And the dreaded hour. Well, whenever you have, so is that a verb? Well, let's think about what always is the case when something is a verb. So let's look at this tiny little sentence down here. Gabor eats, and let's fill it out a little. Gabor eats bugs. Now, whenever something is a verb and is functioning properly, you can change the tense of the verb and leave everything else the same, and you should come up with something perfectly fine. So, Gabor eats bugs. You can substitute eats with is eating. Gabor is eating bugs. Gabor ate bugs. Gabor will be eating bugs. If you just change the tense of the sentence, of the verb, that is, everything should be fine. But look what would happen if you tried to change dreaded. The dreaded hour. Well, that's a good English phrase. But the is dreading hour, or the will be dreaded hour, or anything else. You can't do it. You can't change this into different tenses. This isn't a verb. The hour of reckoning. Again, if it is a verb, you should be able to do anything that we were doing with eats down here. You can't say the hour of will be reckoning. The dreaded hour of will be reckoning draw near. I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. Draw, similarly, what is doing the drawing near? What is drawing near? Well, it's the hour that is drawing near. But then you're into this same thing that there's no way that hour agrees with the verb draw. You get the hour draw near. And of course it isn't the hour draw near, it's the hour draws near. Now, I know this may be a little, in a way, frustrating because I haven't told you what all these things are. But again, that's not the point of this video. The point is to see what they aren't. And they aren't verbs. And that should show you that it's not right to think of a verb as an action word, because I would hate to have to explain why felt, which is indeed a verb and is the only verb in this sentence, why felt has more action in it than seeing or smirking or dreaded or draw or reckoning or approach. I just wouldn't even know where to begin. I don't know how to make that case. But what I can say is that felt is the only word in this sentence that has a subject. And that's what a verb is. It's something that has a subject. And the subject-verb combination is the heart of the English sentence, and that's the right place to start when you're trying to figure out what English grammar is.